everything you're saying is kind of public, but you also can't walk an idea back. So when there's a controversy, one of the things that's hard is that when a lot of your conversations, particularly on campus, are in this space where you can't really test out an idea. Like if you're face-to-face speaking, your words are ephemeral. So if you're going to say something a little different, you can sort of say a version of it. You can kind of see how people in the room react. If everyone looks at you like you're crazy, you can think, I don't want to really push this one. And then you hope that sort of what you said kind of disappears in the past. Social media, it's very hard to do that because of its permanence.
All right, everyone, welcome to the conversation on social media regarding college campuses and politics, hosted by Heterodox Academy and Bridge USA. My name is Manu Meal. I help lead Bridge USA. Super grateful to Heterodox, to Jonathan Haidt, to the leadership, to Daniel Coas running the back end for all that you all do. This is such an important conversation, and I'm so happy to be hosting this conversation. I'll be moderating today as I introduce all of our panelists. I'll just have them slowly turn on their screen so that you can introduce and see them. And then I will be quiet because we're really here for their takes. As always, I'm always the most underqualified person on this panel, so I'm excited to quickly turn it over to them. And I know that you have been through many Zoom panels, many webinars. I promise you this one's going to be interesting because we have a perspective of a student, of an academic, of a researcher, practitioner. So there's a lot of perspectives going into this. To quickly give you a preview into the structure of this event, first, we're going to go into the context and history of social media. How has it evolved in college campuses? Where are we coming from? Then we're going to talk about where it is right now. How are students dealing with it? How are faculty dealing with it? How are universities dealing with it? How is it impacting our ability to have political dialogue? Then we're going to go a little bit into what next. And then finally, we're going to go into the scariest part of these conversations, which is solutions, because it's very easy to criticize. It's much harder to think about how we actually solve the problem. And then finally, we're going to turn it over to you for questions and answer period with the panelists. So please feel free to drop your questions. We would love to sort of hear from you and answer them. And that's going to be for about 25 to 30 minutes. So with that, let's get right into it. First, I want to introduce Judith Donath, who is a faculty fellow at Harvard's Berkman Klein Center and an Heterodox Academy member. Among many things, she is what I'm not, which is an author. She's written a book called The Social Machine, Designs for Living Online, and the former director of the MIT Media Lab's social media group. The next person we have is Reem Maham. Special shout out to Reem. He's actually a junior at LSU studying political science, and he's actually one of the founders of a Bridge chapter at LSU. Reem is also active in campus student government. He's worked in the Texas legislature, and I just learned, Reem, that you're a judge, which is also something that I'm not. And then finally, we have Monica Guzman, who's the director of digital storytelling at Braver Angels. I can certainly tell you that Monica's an awesome job because I've heard so much about you, and it's finally nice to see you and meet you. And she's got a book coming out called I Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. There's the book right up. I know you timed the launch of the book with this event, so it's awesome to see you. So welcome, everyone. With that, let's get right into it. So the first question, or sort of set of questions that I want to get into, is what is your actual connection to this topic? How is it relevant to you? So I'll go to Monica first, which is just directly, Monica, how does social media affect your work at Braver Angels? How have you sort of navigated it?
Yeah, so Braver Angels is the nation's largest cross-partisan grassroots organization working specifically to bring red and blue together to bridge the political divide. And we know that the division right now in this country is intense. And a lot of folks identify very strongly with their political beliefs and their partisan sides. And of course, there's just all kinds of battles being waged all the time across these things. So it's really intensified the degree to which we just have feelings about the politics of the other side, about how it affects, in a very true way, our lives and what's really at stake. So Braver Angels has a lot of work to do right now, and we acknowledge and we know and we sense that the biggest discursive platforms right now in terms of volume are social media. That's where most of our exchanges are happening. Is it where most of our valuable exchanges are happening? a question we will for sure tackle today. But yes, we have among our many skills-based workshops at Braver Angels is a skills for social media workshop that we launched in the fall, really by popular demand, because people are going, all right, great, you guys tell us how to talk to each other in person, but what about that Facebook thread that my uncle started? What about that? So it really does come in a lot. Other things I'll say, I was a tech columnist for many years, and right around when social media sort of, when was it, 2006, that Facebook went from being just for college students to, your mom, and then everything changed. That was a long time ago, folks. Things have gotten complicated. So I'll leave it at that.
They're certainly complicated, and I'll leave it to you guys to unpack that. Next, I'll go to Reem. Reem, you're a student at LSU, so your perspective is particularly valuable in this conversation. But please, how social media affected your life, your work, LSU's campus, et cetera?
Yeah, well, let's start off. It's crazy to think that Facebook's once for college students because, man, you would not find me or a friend of mine posting regularly on Facebook these days. That's for sure. But being on campus, involved in a political organization here at LSU that specifically tries to help bridge the divide between the left, right, center, the disillusioned, whoever it may be. We're on social media a lot, looking at what's happening among our campus political organizations. And I'm happy to say LSU has a very informed student body, certainly in that upper echelon of those who are really involved and are out there tweeting regularly about the things that are going on this campus. And they certainly know what's going on. But corollary to that, those conversations are not always the most productive when you have people from the left-leaning groups on our campus and from the right-leaning groups on our campus going at it with one another in their Twitter mentions. It's disheartening, to say the least. And being in student government, of course, I've also seen this from a more just student activism perspective, as it's been sometimes beneficial to the members of our student government to be able to get their message directly in front of administrators and show the support they have from other students by using social media.
Certainly. I mean, social media brought us the Arab Spring and also one of the most divided times in history. So, who knows? So I'm gonna, last but not least, I want to go to Judith. And actually, Judith, I'll have you segment us into the next section as well, which is if you could tell us a little bit of your context and your work in this space, but then also going into sort of the next topic, which is how did we end up here with social media? What does that sort of development arc look like? So please, Judith.
Okay, so well, for everyone who thinks that Facebook being not for college students is ancient history, we're gonna just like move back a couple more decades. So I started looking at, I guess, the roots of social media when I was in college, which is when Usenet was young. So this would be in the early 80s. I was a history major and decided to start taking computer classes. I was really interested in scientific and technological revolutions. And I thought there's one going on right here. I'll start learning to program and see what it's like from the inside. And found Usenet news groups and was fascinated at that time with what seemed extraordinary, the fact that you suddenly could correspond with thousands of people across the world who you had no idea what they looked like, et cetera, all those things. So fast forward from there, I eventually ended up in graduate school at MIT. And there, a lot of my work, I was a graduate student and then eventually a professor there for many years, was around how interfaces affect the way people socialize online. Because one of the things that's interesting is that architects talk about how if you can make a soaring temple and that will change, people will feel reverent in that space. In other spaces, like you can have a kindergarten and that will change how people feel. But the design of an online environment so much more radically affects what people can see of each other, how they feel, how they can behave. It determines, is the other person anonymous? Do you get to see their history? Do you see them as pictures? Everything about what you can see of other people is determined by the interface. And so its effect on the dynamics of our interactions are tremendous. And so a lot of my work there was really about how we can design those differently. And in particular, the work that I'm still doing now, a lot of it comes from signaling theory in biology, which is basically a way of looking at the evolutionary importance of truth and honesty. and saying that, we really underestimated how important communication is. We tend to think of, evolution and survival of the fittest and who has the strongest weapons or can run the fastest. But communication is actually really important there also. And the big problem in communication turns out to be reliability. How do you know when something is true, whether you should believe it? And it's particularly hard because it's often very beneficial to lie, to say that you're better, smarter, more well-intentioned than you are. So I got really interested in looking at that theory to understand the dynamics of identity and deception online. Just started looking at, again, back in the days of Usenet News, but later on with Facebook, et cetera, and then thinking about that in terms of design. So for instance, like just one idea I'll talk about from that is that there's no body online. And if you think about all the ways that we ultimately control behavior, at some level, they all come down to controlling people physically. Online, there's no physicality. So how can you think of something that people will care enough that they have some sort of skin in this game, that they will care about what they lose if if a community wants to censor them? And so one of the things is history, how you build up your reputation and your history over time, and how interfaces, which right now don't really do that much of that, but if you start thinking about, for instance, you mentioned Twitter, and if you start thinking about how can you visualize someone's history through Twitter, so that if you saw something new from a stranger at a glance, you would have a better idea who they were. What are the rhythms of their interactions? What are the words they use? How do they react to things? So that's been, sort of a sort of long career in this in a nutshell.
And I would just say, it's fascinating that you said communication, reliability. I mean, many people talk about an evolutionary theory that our ability to communicate is what distinguishes us as a species. And then you talk about, the physicality and how it doesn't exist online. I guess I'll go to Monica next, which is just, I want to put a pin in the question of physicality online. I do want to ask you all a question about whether or not we should have online IDs, whether or not we should have the ability to be anonymous online. But putting that aside, Monica, how have you sort of seen social media change our political discourse over time? Maybe taking it more specifically from the Braver Angels route.
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot. I was very present for the social media Web 2.0 explosion that happened in the latter part of the 2000s, basically that first decade. And back then, there was so much novelty. There was so much optimism and excitement. I think for good reason, right? For all the reasons that Judith was saying too. Wow, what an explosion! What a democratization of expression, right? The fact that Lady Gaga and I both have the exact same space on Twitter, it's like, whoa. And so the way that what that did to our discourse was phenomenal. And what that allowed people to do, it was really not just social media, but social media plus the smartphone meant that you also added in the element of witnessing, of photos, right? Now we have, oh my gosh, our phones. Do you guys remember like the old phones? Photos were like, why even bother taking any photos? They looked terrible. And then photos became not only, beautiful on the phone, but really easy to snap and share. And so here we are creating this like web of awareness, of witnessing, of all the things happening in our country at the same time. For all these different reasons, our political story over the last 20 years has become so dramatic, right? I remember, 2006, I want to say, I might be a little wrong about that year, but there was a year where Time magazine said that the person of the year was you. And they put on their cover just a mirrored, silverish paper to make the point that, oh my gosh, it's all about you now in 2006. Look at this explosion of social media. And so that's really become the main differentiator. That's become the transformative special sauce, is that our voices, our opinions, our little opinions, our big opinions are now so easy to share, so easy to put into communication with all these other opinions. It's a beautiful thing. It's a dangerous thing. It's constructive. It's destructive. And so at Braver Angels, that's the world we're in. It's a complicated thing. It's a two-edged sword. There's the good and the bad. On the one hand, there are some places on social media, just like there are in real life, where people exchange serious insights and can cross big divides and see, wait a minute, why do you look at it that way? Okay, here's what I think. On the other hand, the emotion of social media and the economics of media that have come in, right? I've been in media a long time, I can tell you, right? Like the research has shown us, even right now, a study from last year showed if you want, your news article or what have you to fly on Twitter, and it's political in some way, the more partisan words you put in, you can actually boost how viral that tweet gets by like 60% with each word.
Yeah.
Like say liberal, say Biden, say, whatever label you say, it will help. Because why? Because it gets a rise out of people. So in other words, it's not that our political universe and the content of our politics and policy discussions has like qualitatively changed. It's the communication, like Judith said, we underestimate the importance of communication.
Right.
And we are talking a lot, but what are we really saying? We are talking a lot, more than ever in the history of this planet. But are we listening?
Right.
Do we know how to listen anymore? That's what Braver Angels is concerned with.
Yeah, I mean, we've got 2 ears and one mouth, but we like to use our mouth a lot more. And I think that dichotomy that you outlined, that it's a two-sided coin, is something we're going to explore more, because it's both a big success story. I think you use the word democratization awareness, but it's also basically a mirror on humanity itself. And so it can bring out the worst of us. So I want to shift a little bit to Reem, because after all, the conversation is really focused on how has social media affected campus discourse. Reem, could you give us a little bit more of an insight on maybe how it's affected classroom discussions, how it's affected conversations between your friends? And obviously, feel free to go more general as well. But as old people, we are aching to know what the classroom is like.
Yeah, let me kind of start from a 10,000 foot view of what I see social media having done, and then I'm going to get a little bit more narrow about what I've seen. So the very first article I was ever assigned in a political science class, and I'm a political science major, while I was at LSU, was Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone article that came out before I was born in 1995. So my apologies to everyone who I just made feel quite a bit older. Yes, thank you. Look at this. Wonderful props from Monica. And the thesis of the article is essentially that we are less connected with one another in these formational social groups, and then that's causing us to lose social capital. Now, 27 years since he first published the article and 22 years since he published the book, social media has, in many aspects, replaced those institutions of social capital. My pastor has a line that he likes to refer to often, which is, we are more connected than ever before and yet lonelier than ever before. And a huge piece of that is because social media, while it's super connecting, is not as authentic as those person-to-person interpersonal relationships that our brains are wired to create. Okay. 10,000 foot view. Let's talk about what that means actually on campus. First, LSU has established programs to help students be better communicators, because they've recognized that's one of the important things that one is not necessarily being developed as much, and two, that is going to be important when we eventually graduate. And part of that is getting better at speaking one-on-one with people in interview settings or even just in simple conversations. Second to that, one of the biggest effects that I think social media has had on the college campus is that if you have a professor who uses Twitter or Facebook, those are kind of the big two for this kind of thing, who is open about their political beliefs, their students know their political beliefs. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that was always necessarily the case, or at least you'd have to do quite a bit more reading through their academic work or any published work they did. And even then, maybe some reading between the lines. And now I know the political leanings of our honors college dean. And not to say that's a good or bad thing, but it certainly changes the way that students go in looking at a given professor if they know already where they're going to be coming from politically, and particularly in a field like political science that is quite a bit more relevant.
But I just actually double click on that point really quickly.
Yeah.
When you see, let's say you're going into a poli-sci class, I remember we used to have Rate My Professor, right? Where you go on and just see like, how is the professor? But
Yes.
now, with Twitter and Facebook, you can get their political beliefs. Does it sort of chill the level of discussion? Does it influence how students operate? Does it influence how students express their beliefs? Do you feel like you have to talk a certain way to get a good grade? How does that affect the actual performance in the classroom?
I think it's truly dependent on the professor in question, right? I have had some very staunchly partisan professors in my time at LSU. One of whom was the spokesperson for a US senator. So as you can imagine, he's kind of the peak of partisan operative. And his Twitter is one of the more famous ones around LSU, but he fosters an environment inside of his classes that is very open to diverse viewpoints. The problem is that they're self-selecting before that may occur, where students who think they would disagree with that professor self-select and may not enroll in that course as a result of the political beliefs. But in my experience is the professors I've had, even the ones who make their political beliefs wildly known publicly, are more than happy to engage in conversation in which reasonable people can disagree. But I think social media does have a little bit of that chilling effect or pre-sorting effect on the way students may choose to operate.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And I guess I want to sort of focus in a little bit more on a point that actually Judith had made earlier, which is, how do you make communication on social media more reliable? And I think it goes to also a point that you, Reem, and Monica are making about just the coarseness of social media. How do we think we can encourage more accountability when it comes to communication online? Because that seems to be a big facet in all of this. If I'm sitting here and I can create an anonymous account, I can say whatever I want. And frankly, by the way, I've never met someone that comments on YouTube videos, but there's clearly a lot of people out there. So how do you encourage that accountability in social media? I guess I'll go to Monica first.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I would say is that with something like this, it's easy to talk about how we want others' behavior to change, but all we can really control is our own behavior. So when it comes to social media, if you want to encourage accountability, then if someone is poking at you and their avatar is something and they don't seem to have a real name, and they're in this place where accountability may not be all that important to them, then, well, maybe you don't want to engage. So I think a lot comes down to making your own choices about where you do and don't want to engage. Sometimes social media has this really strange ethic. I think it's a little bit of a disease. And the disease is the belief that we all must have an opinion about everything. We all must have opinion about everything, and we better be ready to billboard it on our social media. We better be ready to defend whatever opinion, to explain it, to have one like coming out of a holster. But that's dumb. Is that where did that come from? That's not real. We don't have to, if that's the ethic, if that's the expectation from some folks out there, let that be their expectation. It doesn't have to be mine. So
well, everyone's got to hear my opinion. So, but I just want to go to sort of Judith then really quickly, in terms of thinking through this notion that we want to encourage both more listening, but also more productive conversations. During the pandemic, how have you seen, the use of social media evolve? Do you think it's made things more unhealthy? Do you think that people have been able to communicate? How do you sort of see social media in the age of the pandemic?
I'm going to answer that, though I'm going to also go back to some of the previous points, because I think my quick answer on the pandemic is, without social media, this would have been a much more unpleasant, this has been an unpleasant time, but if we had no social media, we would have been really, really sad and isolated feeling, I think, would be my short answer there. But I want to just complicate the ideas of authenticity. You spoke earlier about anonymity and whether we should be, and I think it's easy to say, it's good to always be reliable, to assume that you always want authenticity. But while I'm far from college, I do have some college-age students among my children. And when I was talking to my daughter, one of the things that kept coming up, I was talking to her about this panel, was that social media has really meant a loss of ephemerality. One of the things that's been really different than when she or you all went to college and when I went to college, it was about you started over. Your past was a complete blank slate and you arrived, except for a few things like, your accent or something, you could really start over. She said she got to college, there was no starting over because everyone already had, their Instagram and they knew of each other. There was no escaping the past that had started building up somewhere before, middle school. And that has continued through college, the sense that you are stuck in a space. So one of the things to remember about pseudonymity and anonymity is that one of my former students, Dana Boyd, has talked a lot about the collapse of context. And it's really, and that was one of the first things she was noting about the beginnings of social networks in the early 2000s was that the ways that we have previously able to keep privacy by just being in a different context have really collapsed. So that speaks also to Rain's point about the professors who used to have perhaps a space where they could talk about what they were doing. I have to say, my memory of professors in college was, many of them, you knew their opinions, and I don't know how much the professor side has changed just because professors are so open, but certainly from student to student, you're going to see a lot more. So it's much harder to find that space where you can exhibit a particular side of your personality that you don't always want to be part of every aspect of your life. And that's a lot online, what anonymity or pseudonymous spaces bring people. Otherwise, you have these very narrowed discourse. And when I was talking to my daughter also, she's at a university famous for its nonstop ability to have scandals. There's scandals on students and administrations and everything. So this fall they had, among others, a big problem with their fraternities. And she was saying that though the discourse online was really different because of social media, because everything you're saying is kind of public, but you also can't walk an idea back. So when there's a controversy, one of the things that's hard is that when a lot of your conversations, particularly on campus, are in this space where you can't really test out an idea. Like if you're face-to-face speaking, your words are ephemeral. So if you're going to say something a little different, you can sort of say a version of it. You can kind of see how people in the room react. If everyone looks at you like you're crazy, you can think, I don't want to really push this one. And then you hope that sort of what you said kind of disappears in the past. Social media, it's very hard to do that because of its permanence. So those are some of the things to think about when you think about things like pseudonymity, is being able to carve out those other spaces.
Reem, I can tell you want to jump in. So
let me jump in for like 1 second here, because
Please.
I actually
take more than a second.
think this is eminently fascinating. The year before, or maybe 2 years before I came to LSU, there had been a major scandal with one of our Greek life organizations on campus with respect to hazing. And our student newspaper, being a provocative student newspaper that it is, ran a pro-con Greek life column where one person wrote the pro column and the other person wrote the con column. The person who wrote the column against Greek life happened to be a member of Tiger Band, which I'm proud to say I am a member of. Of course, don't speak for anything at all, but part of the reason we always are so quick to say that we don't speak for Tiger Band is because as soon as this individual published this column, people went and found his Instagram, found he was a member of Tiger Band, and said, oh my goodness, Tiger Band is anti-Greek life. And all of Tiger Band is anti-Greek life, which we, again, as an organization, we have no opinions on hardly anything. It was just this individual, by being online, suddenly was affiliated with a group, and his views became affiliated with that entire group. And I think that's another dimension of this, that as our ideas become more permanent, they also have ramifications about the groups we may be a member in.
That's fascinating that both you and Judith are touching on this notion of sort of the permanence of ideas. One thing I can say, and maybe I'll go to Monica next on this, is that at least in the depolarization space, and Monica, maybe you can disagree with me, but at least on our perspective, it is that because people also have the potential to be anonymous, they're much more likely to say inflammatory and crazy things. And as a result, it drives the discourse one way or the other. Think about bots, for example. But then the notion that you're putting forward is that actually sometimes that anonymity is helpful because it allows us to avoid sort of this broader context and baggage that we come with. Could you speak to that a little bit, Monica? Like, how do you make social media more conducive, I guess, to better conversations? Is anonymity the way to go? Is it, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the one platform that convinced me that anonymity could be beautiful was Reddit years ago. When I jumped in there and started to really study the subreddits and the communities there, anonymity was allowing people to be more honest. It was allowing people to not, to say the sorts of things that are difficult to say out loud to anybody, and they're able to say it and build some extraordinary community from there, where you don't actually doubt the authenticity of what is being said, or the sort of human truth behind a lot of the candor people were putting out there. So that really complicated my view of anonymity as always being like evil. It's like, well, is it? I don't know. And I do think that the ephemera that we're talking about, Judith, I loved your point about, I just imagined getting to college. If I had gotten to college in 2001 and had to carry my social media profile, I wouldn't have been able to do, this is my personal experience from my personal opinion, I don't pretend to speak for anyone else, but in my head, the fact that I got to college and could start over and that no one knew me was wonderful, because right there, everyone serves as a mirror to who I am, and I get to be like, oh, this is who I am now. Whereas my high school friends have all this history, my elementary school friends have all this history, but here I am fresh as a human who can kind of begin again, and how beautiful that was. So yeah, I'm really compelled by this idea of the ephemeral. And I will also point out there's plenty of social media that does do the ephemeral. When Snapchat came around, that was their whole thing, is this will disappear in a day. So don't worry about the trail that you leave. We just want you addicted in the day to day, and now you're going to play games where if you break a streak, you're going to die socially, and there's other problems. But but anyway, I don't know if that got to all your questions, but but I wanted to address that.
Go for it.
I just want to say one quick thing. I think it's also really important to distinguish between, especially for this type of discussion, pseudonymity and anonymity, because there's one is your name, which is you appear with your name, that's the name you go by in physical life. Anonymity is there's no name attached to it. So if you make an utterance here, it's not attached to your next utterance there. We have no idea who it is. There's no continuity. And that can be fairly a hard thing to have in a community setting. But pseudonymity, which is what I think you're talking about on Reddit, is when people appear in some way that doesn't connect to their physical self. It may not connect to they might have 20 other online presence, but they have a history and what their identity builds up in that history. And so that's really very much along those ideas. When I said online, you can have this history and you build up that thing, that's when people will still have something they care about, but it's that pseudonymous identity. And that's quite different than anonymity in terms of discourse.
Yeah, and I think, go ahead, Reem, go please.
No, I was going to say, I think that's what Reddit does exceptionally well, is that with Reddit, I mean, most people don't use their real name for their Reddit username. I certainly don't, but you build up a reputation over time. So I'm on a lot of college football subreddits, and there are certain members of those Reddits who, are known for insightful analysis. And I have no idea who that person is in real life, but I know if I see a post by them, I'm probably going to enjoy the analysis they're bringing to the table. So.
Well, I got the worst of Reddit because I did an AMA on it, and it didn't work out as well. So because I was fully not anonymous, or as Judith would say, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but pseudonymous, if I got that correctly. But pseudonymous.
Perfect.
I want to actually quickly go to Reem with a specific question. I was actually following up on Judith's point, which is the notion of sort of the level of anxiety and depression and sort of what's increased because of social media, because you're arriving to campus with all your social profiles and your baggage, and you can't really start over again. How have you seen, especially given your work with Bridge, where you're trying to sort of have productive conversations on campuses and you're trying to get people to have dialogues, do you think that social media would allow that? Do you think there's a way for us to be using it so that we can use it for productive means in when it comes to our discourse? Is it possible for us to have constructive conversations?
Yes, it is possible to have constructive conversations. I think it's a little bit harder on social media. The most constructive conversations I've ever had on social media are not in public forums of social media, right? So it's not in a tweet thread where all of us are actually just trying to be performative about our beliefs for the people who are watching us in public. What it's been for me is it's been, say, I make a Snapchat about something moderately political, and for those of you not familiar, if you slide up on a post on Snapchat, you can DM the person or direct message the person who sent it. And so the best conversations I've ever had are those ones where you're no longer publicly having this conversation, you're having it with just another individual. And while no, it's not quite face to face, it's certainly a step removed from the public performance that Twitter or posting something publicly can be. And I think when you get rid of that public performance aspect, there's a little bit more opportunity to at least be willing to consider that you might be wrong. Or yeah, that's really what it comes down to. Because if you're on Twitter and you say, oh, sorry, I was wrong, there's going to be a whole host of people that are going to come and say, look, you see, we told him he's wrong. Look at that. And no one wants to go through that because that's not comfortable for anybody. We don't like being reminded of being wrong. And so I think social media can be useful in making that initial connection that leads to a productive conversation. That answers the question. Yeah.
Monica, go for it.
Yeah, Monica, if I can jump in, you had asked before, and this ties into what Reem just said, but you had asked before, how has the social media landscape changed and with our political environment? And one thing that I've certainly noticed is on the earlier days of Twitter, for example, people really would use a name, usually their real name, sometimes another name. They would use a name, right? Now it seems like just as often, in the space that used to be just for your name, you will see a cause, you will see a banner, you will see an acronym, a hashtag for some political thing. What that's saying is it's become much more common for people to actually identify on their social media profiles, on the page that says, who am I? Right there, taking the same real estate as their name is their opinion. And I find that just, wow, is that earth-shakingly interesting. And boy, does it have consequences. Reem, you were just talking about the performative aspect. I think about five pieces of a conversation that we should be really conscious of if we want to have a productive conversation. And those are time, attention, parity, containment, and embodiment. By containment, I mean, is this conversation contained to the people having it? And the bigger the degree to which you have an invisible audience, the more that you can expect that the temptation to perform is going to overtake the opportunity to learn.
Can I
please
say
go.
One quick point too about the private conversations, because I've noticed this also just in my own experience, that even like private groups on Facebook are very different than public discourse, private conversations everywhere. I think, and while I certainly see many problems with social media, I end up often being the defender of it. I do think that a lot of the very negative publicity that social media gets is partly because it's most vitriolic, it's most difficult, and often it's least useful are the very, very public facing conversations and interactions. But especially when people aren't familiar with a medium or they don't use it, that's all they see of it. So, and also, even if people are doing research and they want to be able to look at like Twitter users or Facebook users, they're not really able to look at the Facebook users of secret groups that they only can see the public facing sides. So we're also seeing a lot of the worst and most extreme elements of this. And a lot of the, I think, particularly useful, more nuanced conversations do happen in private, but they don't become part of the public reputation of social media.
And the question there is how do we get those conversations to define social media? Because part of what I've seen, Judith, is that if the norm that you see of social media are the conversations that happen on the extreme, then people think that that's the most permissible behavior. So I guess I would throw that question back at you, which is, how do we prevent those conversations from causing everyone to at least think that this is the way that the platform ought to be used?
Well, I mean, part of it is, I think some of it is writing articles that people who are familiar with the more private spaces maybe need to speak more about that, because I think a lot of the writing ends up by people who don't use social media because they know they don't like what they're seeing and they can analyze what they don't like, but that's public. But another piece just on that interface side, and I think this goes back to the history piece, is that the designs that we're seeing are pretty problematic. And this is partly why I think Reddit may be one of the more exceptional ones, is that when we had, once the net became commercial, commercial activity could happen online, it really changed the direction of a lot of design. And so if you look at the design for things such as Twitter and Facebook in particular, that the importance of driving particular behaviors, not because they're good for conversation, but because they're good for the advertisers, or because they're good for getting people to stay on, as opposed to having quality conversations. Just, you want them to be there with their eyes so that they can look at more advertising. And those end up motivating a lot of the design decisions. So, and that can be particularly egregious when we're talking about some of the issues around posting inflammatory statements, because a lot of the things that will drive engagement are inflammatory things. So you could have a really good conversation and it goes on for 10 minutes and then it's done. That's not necessarily what you want if you want people to just be on for hours and hours and hours. And so a piece of it is, if we look at what the ways you would design things to make conversations more productive, they're not the things that you do to design so that people will stay up and argue nonstop.
Absolutely. And I think if I were to sort of extend that further, Monica, you're sort of about to release a book about having constructive conversations, about using our curiosity to be able to have those difficult conversations. Do you think that we can have furiously curious conversations on social media? How do we think? How can we approach that?
Absolutely.
What's the solution? How do we get out of this mess?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, one is to just be conscious of the limitations that social media platforms and technology put on the full, complement of communication tools that we have. We mentioned embodiment. Obviously, you can see me and you can hear my voice and the tone that I use. And if I were on social media, I would have emojis to try to communicate tone, right? But we can be conscious of those limitations on social media and still make the most of the ability to connect at scale with people who are far away from us, who are extremely different from us. And I do think that it really is rooted in the concept of curiosity, and frankly rooted in how we react to other opinions and how we choose to express our own and put them into conversation with other opinions. The default, the easy thing, is to follow our emotions. And so we see something that makes us mad. Well, we want to respond by being just as mad, and just as mad the other way. Maybe we don't stop to think, what is the end game, right? Our default is to want to win because, well, that's our ego playing, and we want to win, right? But do we want to win? I mean, when you really kind of blow that up, like, is that the best way to have the conversation? Now, you have to kind of stop and take a couple breaths and be like, all right, this person really disagrees with me on this issue. Why? What path did they walk to convictions that seem so opposed to my own? What's there? I want to know. And so then you ask different questions. So you ask questions like, instead of, how could you possibly believe, you ask, how did you come to believe that? What experiences informed this view. What ultimately concerns you about your view on gun rights or abortion or the Texas law or what's going on in Congress? What ultimately concerns you? I've found that questions of concern are some of the most valuable questions. They steer us away from judgment and toward learning. So it really is about being conscious of inquiry and the opportunity for inquiry that social media really does provide. What I have found going back 15 years, as a journalist in newsrooms where people were like, well, the one rule here if you're a reporter is never read the comments. And I was like, that seems wrong. I don't know. Like, our readers are actually talking to us. Maybe we should check it out, guys. I don't know. It doesn't seem that bad. And I got it. They didn't want to read the comments because for a lot of people, that was a place where they expressed their anger. Okay, cool. But what if anger is data? What if there's a story behind the anger? What if instead of being triggered by the anger, you go, what's behind this? And so I started doing that. And I learned to love really toxic comment threads because just by asking a couple of interesting questions to people who actually were there not to troll, which is more than people than you think, they actually were shocked that someone was listening and started to engage. And then I learned something from them.
Well, I think the quote of the panel is, Monica loves toxic comment threads. I have to say that the level of sort of inquiry, I think that's absolutely right. And I want to sort of go to Reem on this point of, you're in student government, Reem, you work in the student judiciary as well. How is social media affecting that work? Do you see sort of the data that Monica's talking about? Are there ways to utilize people's anger, to utilize people's misperceptions for good? What are some examples in student government that you've had to deal with? Please feel free to expand on that.
Well, let me start from the basics. How is social media affecting student government? Last year, we had to run an entire campus-wide election where, we were still in the midst of pretty heavy COVID protocols. A lot of students had nearly all of their classes online. And so campaigns were primarily run on social media. You had people on Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and of course, Twitter, all doing their student government campaigns from there. And, there's one crystallizing example of the effect social media has had on student government, right? Where ordinarily you would have to wait till the next student government meeting to voice your disapproval about something, or maybe if you see something that evening, at least the next day until you run into someone and can talk to them about it. The night of the election, the governor of Louisiana endorsed one of our campaigns, and the campaign posted the video on their Twitter, and instantly you had members of that campaign defending the fact that they had posted it. You had members of other campaigns attacking them for going as far to get the governor's endorsement in an election. And there was no cooling period. There was no, I have to at least wait till the next day or the next time I see this person to talk to them about it. You could instantly jump in with your opinions about the governor of Louisiana endorsing a student government campaign, which, whether or not you think it's good or bad, I think letting everyone sleep it off at least may have led to some more productive conversations on that front. And that gets a little bit to the broader point, is that social media in student government has reduced the time you have to really consider an issue before you're expected to have an opinion on it. There's been time and time again where our student body presidents have felt pressured to immediately respond to something that's going on campus, on Twitter or Instagram or through whatever platform they really can and are expected to. And it takes away some nuance that certainly from our side in judicial, we find that some of the most fraught cases are the ones where someone meant to say something a little bit more nuanced than they ended up saying, and just in the flash of the moment didn't. And now we have to come back and play cleanup a little bit and hopefully make sure we can rectify everything in a constructive way.
Well, there's a lot there. Without trying to get sidetracked, I do want to give the last question to Judith before we go to Q&A. I do have to say one thing, which is the governor of Louisiana, I feel like might have more important things to worry about. Not saying that the student government elections at LSU are very important, but that was the first.
I'm not allowed to have an opinion on that, Manu.
Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, you don't speak for Tiger Band. Let's go to Judith. So Monica's about to release a book. Judith, you're writing a book about technology, trust, and deception. I would love for you to talk a little bit about that and discuss how it's affecting campaigns, how it's affecting elections, but also if there's other things that you want to touch on, please feel free to do so as well.
Okay, so the Technology, Trust, and Deception book is looking at taking the work that I've been interested in with applying things like signaling theory to understanding, our behavior online, et cetera, and broadening it quite a bit. I mean, one of the issues there is that signaling theory did come out of, one version comes out of economics, one out of biology. I think in terms of looking at human behavior, we need to look at it in a broader context of how people learn to trust each other, and also how how good behavior or accepted behavior is enforced through external controls, which at the moment are increasing because of the increasing ability to surveil people at all times. And that's particularly relevant for online behavior. So the book looks at all kinds of technologies and both how the desire to deceive, the desire to detect and deter deception have motivated all kinds of technological inventions throughout history, but then also how do these different inventions and developments change the balance between honesty and deception. And so a couple of things that are particularly relevant to this discussion. One is, a lot of what I talk about is how we humans in particular don't use particularly costly signals all the time. A lot of our communication is words, like the spoken word, which has no inherent reliability. It's just as easy for me to say the sky is pink and green as it is to say the sky is blue. One of those is true, one is not, but they're both as easy to say. But a lot of what we do instead is we develop these trusted relationships with other people, with groups of things we trust. And a huge amount of our signaling is about the maintenance of those group boundaries. A lot of, like, if you meet a new person, the conversations you have with them tend to be figuring out, are you from the same place? Do you know people in common? Do you like the same teams? You're constantly looking for common ground. It's really an exploration of what are the groups we have in common so that we can figure out sort of how much sort of that inherent coordination we have is. But in terms of how a lot of group things are maintained, some of the issues with trust are, it's about behaving very well to those on the inside of your group and behaving quite poorly often to those on the outside. And so what I think we're seeing a lot, obviously, in this highly polarized time is the exacerbation of those things. Your own group is good, the others are evil, horrible, and bad. And so what we're seeing, this is how it plays out even more online, where all you have are these words. You can use them quite extremely. And then also a phenomenon that did not originate with social media. It's a much more ancient one, but that one way of forming a group, particularly highly authoritarian groups, is through the replacement of the evidence of people's own senses with saying, I will believe whatever the leader of this group says, and that as sort of a loyalty test, they will make claims that are clearly not true. Because again, if I say the sky is blue and you say it's blue, we're agreeing, but it doesn't bind us. We're just both agreeing on a true observation. If I say the sky is green with pink polka dots, and then you agree with that, that's a sign that you are going to let me define what you're going to say, to think of as true. You can see this in the history of religions. There's just a lot of ways that people use agreement to agree on something that is false as a way of forming a knowledge boundary. And since in the online world, all your boundaries are being knowledge-based, we're seeing quite a bit of that. So that's one of the issues I deal with in the book that I think will give us some insight into how some of the behaviors we see online are, but there's a bunch of others. Some have to do with fashion, et cetera. But
yeah, and I would just say that on that point of sort of agreement and utilizing and using agreement as almost an authoritarian signal, and setting boundaries of what people can sort of say. I mean, it goes to a tribal instinct. It goes to Monica's earlier point of how people often put their opinions at the same level as their names, because oftentimes we ascribe to ideas more than we even identify our personhood. So I want to get to Q&A. We've got a lot of questions from the audience. I know that we all want to answer each and every one of these questions, but in the spirit of trying to get to all these questions, I have sort of segmented out if we can answer them specifically. And if you're dying to answer a question, please feel free to jump in, of course. So the first question that we have, and audience members, feel free to continue posting more questions so that our team can sort of sift through them, is can we block deliberate disinformation and still protect free expression? And I would point this question to Monica because it's sort of a big thing in the depolarization space. It's something that Braver Angels has to often deal with. How do we combat disinformation and still allow everyone to speak their minds?
Yeah, I think that the major problem I see in that is that if you are able to block deliberate disinformation and protect freedom of expression, it assumes that you are able to clearly and certainly define the difference between actual disinformation and just an opinion that is highly unpopular. And the problem comes when that becomes a very difficult, that people want to believe that there's a Sharpie line, a thick Sharpie line that exists on all issues between what is clear disinformation and is what's just an unpopular opinion or an unpopular view of the world. But the truth is, I think when you zoom in, that's a really difficult line to draw in a Sharpie marker across everything. And not to mention, our world is changing so quickly. And a lot of what changes is just our own norms, you know? And so norm negotiation in a society requires everyone at the table. And so if you might accidentally exclude a lot of voices from the table, what you do is renegotiate norms without everyone at the table, which divides us even more. So anyway, it's a really tricky thing. And I'm not saying don't try it. I love all the efforts out there, and there do appear to be some places where you can absolutely draw a pretty clear Sharpie line. Okay, cool. We just have to be open to the fact that maybe those places are correct now, but give it a couple of years and then those places actually start to silence more voices than they should, you know? So because we're imperfect, we need to continually revisit our assumptions about how misinformation should be managed. This is not a one and done deal. This is not a thing where you can just draw a bunch of commandments and they hold for 5 years. No, completely and constantly renegotiated with lots of voices at the table is the only way to do it ethically.
So it seems like you're almost alluding there that we should be careful to block things that we perceive as disinformation because that line is very difficult to sort of draw.
Yeah, Braver Angels has a workshop called Depolarizing Within, and I think that there are folks who believe polarization, the blindness of polarization, is a problem for other people, but not for me. I'm highly curious. I'm highly educated.
Sure.
My opinions about what's right and wrong are completely about the truth.
Yeah.
Are you sure? Are you sure that it might just not be a different way of looking at the world? How can
I'm just more special than everyone, as they say. Totally, it makes a lot of sense. I want to go to Judith with the next question, which is, and it's directed actually directly at you, Judith.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No.
Okay, so you spoke about the design of the platforms and the effects that they have. Could you please share some specific examples? Are the platforms designed to be addictive and inflammatory, or is that a byproduct of the platform and human nature?
Well, I think for one, the answer to that is both. It depends on the platform. Some of them are inflammatory by mistake and some are deliberately. And I think, well, for one, like sort of jumping to my end conclusions, I think it's really useful to have a huge variety of platforms. We really need a heterodoxy of them. I think we want some where there's massive amounts of fact checking from a possibly partisan source and then a parallel one from a different one, some that are anonymous, some that aren't, some that have no checking, some that have very strict rules, some that have none. But so for instance, something like 4chan, where a lot of really dark memes of the net emerged, was designed in order to do that very deliberately. Not only was it anonymous, but it was really designed to have things bubble up. Every idea on it you'd post something anonymously and things would disappear very quickly unless people kept re-upping them. So what it meant was it sorted stuff out to be viral. So that was a design decision to make a particular type of behavior that many other people find horrible, but it worked really well for coming up with viral memes. Twitter has ended up, I think, being a little bit more divisive than the design was intended, partly because there's problems with things like follower count and retweet count, where if you don't know how much something has been retweeted, if you don't measure that, it's hard to say, how do we bubble up something when someone says something really good and really interesting? But when you have the count there, it tends to motivate people to say things mainly for that count. We all want something bigger. And it is a part of human nature. It's not so much that things are just more inflammatory, but Deb Roy, the Media Lab, had these very interesting analysis of it that showed that you're going to get things that are misinformation get retweeted more than real information. And if you think about it, that's actually pretty intuitive why that would happen, because a lot of what actually goes on in reality is boring. A lot of like real news is not that interesting, or it's fairly nuanced, or like it was almost an exciting story, but it isn't. Once you have the freedom of fiction, you can make things as interesting as you want them. So once you're free from that burden of telling the truth, you can make something that is designed to be as repeatable and interest mongering as possible. So in terms of the specific design of other popular platforms, someone mentioned Snapchat earlier. That's an obvious one of saying, because it's ephemeral, we're going to get really different behaviors. And, I think that right now, what we are missing are things that are designed for really considered conversation. So something where the conversation might be central, whereas your identity is less so. So for instance, if you think of something that takes the pseudonymity of certain spaces, but said, let's take these ideas, let the ideas bubble up, but they're not necessarily attached to people. That maybe you could post words, you would vote under your name for what was good and what wasn't, but the actual texts would be anonymous. There's like a whole bunch of things like that I would like to see people and designers playing with more. Aside from, I think we have two deep infrastructural problems in how that's limiting design. One is what I mentioned earlier about the commercial intention. And then there's also sort of this winner take all assumption that if you don't have 1 million users, your platform is useless and it should just go away. Whereas I think we need to support more spaces for alternative designs and say, let people use these as they're useful. They don't all have to be 1 million users. But right now, things like that just tend to get shut down.
And just in the interest of time, Judith, I actually want to put a pin in that specific point of infrastructure and developing the right type of platform. I would love to actually put that as a last question for the panel to answer, because I think that's exactly where we're going to head. And it's a thing that we haven't heard much. So I'm going to quickly go to Reem with the next question, and then I want us to come back to that question at the end. So please do think about what we want to say on how to develop the right type of infrastructure for these platforms. So Reem, in your case, one of the questions that we have is, do you have advice for a person who needs and wants to overcome an addiction to social media or scrolling Reddit or YouTube? And I'm sure as a college student, you've never procrastinated on YouTube before an essay. So I guess I would just go to you. How do you combat an addiction of social media? The other piece just being, what fraction of undergraduates are experiencing clinical addictions to their screen? I don't know if you'll be able to answer that second part, but just could you talk a little bit about social media addictions?
Yeah, so anecdotally, I have refused to download TikTok because I know the second I download it, I'm going to treat it just like I treat Twitter, where it's just constantly scrolling through it. And let me say what I do when I need to kind of like breathe, not look at Twitter for a hot minute, because one, I've put a 1 hour limit on Twitter onto my phone for every day. Apple actually lets you put limits for how long you can use an app onto your phone. And so I've put a 1 hour limit on it for Twitter, where until I'm done with school, I'm only allowed to have Twitter open on my phone for 1 hour. And then once I'm done with classes for the day, fine, who cares? But until then, like 1 hour, that's all you get. And then just generally speaking, what I've tried to do is I've tried to say, like, the relationships I build with people that may be on a social media site, like, get their number or something and just take those off the social media platform, because then you're not going to be distracted by the other things, and just text them, call them, heck, go out to coffee or something. That's always been one of my absolute favorite things to do. And goodness knows, being in a college town, there are plenty of terrific coffee shops around me. So that's my very simple advice is, have the dedication to put on a limit and stick to the limit, and then take those relationships you build and bring them offline.
I totally agree with that. Set limits. Isn't that like the secret to life? I just want to sort of jump.
It's difficult though, I will say that.
I agree.
So, yeah.
I want to sort of leapfrog to sort of the next question, which I would put out to anyone, which is that, do any of you feel that this trend to put our political views on the same level as our name, our hometown, this alludes to something that Monica had said, has led to any secondary phenomenon of causing some people to avoid politics altogether? Essentially, is our current trend causing more apathy? Please, whoever wants to jump in first. Reem, why don't you go, and then Monica, go for it. Yeah.
Briefly, yes, because people feel like if I don't completely identify with one group, that I don't have a space in politics.
Monica?
Yeah, and I would say that when we put our opinions at the level of our names, I mean, if you want to do it, fine, but recognize the pressure you are putting on yourself to defend your opinion at all costs and potentially to not hear alternatives. Because what you're defending is yourself, not your opinion. What people threaten when they give you a disagreement is you, not just your opinion. So, I mean, at Braver Angels, frankly, one of the basic principles of what we do is in our workshops and in our programs is separate you from your opinion. So the more that you set up your infrastructure in the platforms where you engage with others to equate those two and to stick them like glue to each other, the more difficult you're making it potentially for yourself and your psychology to stay open-minded to others.
Judith, do you have anything you want to add to that question, or have Reem and Monica answered it?
I mostly answered. I just want to say that again, these are not, they're part of what's hard about looking things about social media and polarization now is that we live at an extremely polarized time. It will take a long time to untangle how much social media caused this, if really at all. I think it's become a little bit of a scapegoat. If you look at history, we've had similar times in history long before there was social media. There are certainly issues with the algorithms and things like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter that if you start looking at something without any extremist content, you can easily get pulled into a rabbit hole of extremism. That's certainly an egregious example. But you can also walk down the street and see people wearing T-shirts that proclaim their political views. They're wearing hats, they're wearing bumper stickers, they're doing all kinds of things. That is something that people like to do because they want to be represented by their opinion and their claim to a affiliation. So I think that all the things you're saying are true, that people then see them as that affiliation, but I do think that that is a deliberate choice that people want a lot of the time.
Makes sense. I want to end with, go ahead, Judith. Go ahead, please.
Good.
I was just gonna end with what I promised, which is that question sort of actually Judith touched on her response, and this will be the last question. Unfortunately, we could be here all day/night. I miscalculated. There was going to be a sunset, so I've had to move positions. I would just ask you, if you, and I'll word it this way, if there were any sort of design choices or infrastructure choices that you would make, or changes that you would make to how Twitter works, or Facebook works, what would they be? What are different infrastructural design methods that we can utilize? And pretend you're the CEO and you could make that decision. Like, how would you make these platforms more conducive to constructive conversations? And let's try to keep our responses to a minute. So, Reem, do you want to go first? Do you want to sort of first take on the CEO hat?
No, I don't want to go first, but I'll do it anyways. The best things about the platforms that I use is Snapchat has a wonderful feature that I think is worthy of replication, which is you can create different feeds that you can post on. You can have your main feed that all your followers can see, that you post everything you want. But then you can have different curated feeds that only some followers that you know see. And so say I want to post political stuff, but I don't necessarily want everyone that I know to see the political stuff. I'll create my own feed to post that stuff on. Or say, I really like taking pictures of my food. I'll create my own feed to put food on. I think that mechanism is actually really useful and something I'd like to see replicated.
Monica?
Yeah, I don't know. I have all these wacky ideas. One thing I'll just say, it's a great infrastructure change on Twitter. Happened some time ago, I think, but where they started to say, you're going to share this article. Don't you want to read it first? Don't you want to read it first? Oh, I loved when that came along. That was fantastic. The other day I saw one that said, this is a charged topic. Please remember that this is a human that you're talking to. And I was like, whoa, did the Twitter algorithm just say that to me? And it did. It had a little notice. And apparently they're kind of experimenting with those messages. Now, that can go too far. It's like, that's a little robot. I don't want a robot telling me how to be a human. You're a robot. Don't be, no. But anyway, and the other wild idea I have is if I were on Facebook, I would like, tell how many angry faces are in a long thread, how many angry faces. And then if you post on too many angry face type feeds in a short amount of time, I would be the Facebook algorithm going, it looks like you've been in some charged conversations. Want to take a break? Like my kids when they play video games, it's like after a certain amount of time, there's game systems that say this. You've been playing a long time. Want to take a break?
Judith?
I'll just reiterate, I guess, the point where I would really love to see more emphasis made on being able to see the history, like the fullness of somebody's interactions, and to some extent, less emphasis on tying people to reality so that it's easier for people to make different accounts. So in a lot of ways, like say, let's use Twitter as an example. It's a simple one that I in some ways don't mind losing the name when people put some information about themselves. So a lot of times the name doesn't mean anything to me. But what I care about is that pattern of how have they reacted. I want to know if I read something that they've said, I want a good sense of how knowledgeable are they? What kind of things do they engage with? What sort of things do they follow? And so things that help me get a sense of what functions much more as the body of their information and their behavior, as opposed to trying to get people to be tied to their real world selves. I think it would be, one, it will help people from having repercussions from daring to say things that they don't necessarily want to react, but it also would mean you could say, this is clearly a account that just got invented in the last day. And this is one that just came in the last day. I'm really going to engage in this conversation with people who've been on this platform for a year and have been sort of engaging with others. And so I think seeing people much more in that type of sort of virtual community relevant context and appearance would help tremendously.
Well, thank you. We'll end it at that. That's a great sort of point to leave off on. Hopefully the CEO of Twitter or the CEO of Facebook are currently audience members to this conversation, and I hope they took notes. I wanted to make sure that we ended on a point of sort of practical solutions. I want to thank everyone for attending. If you're interested in checking out Heterodox Academy, which is working so hard to help professors have productive conversations and openness in universities, please check them out. If you're interested in a student solution, if you're interested in having college chapters or discussions, if you want young people to depolarize conversations, check out Bridge USA. If you're interested in one of the largest depolarization movements in the country, check out Braver Angels. And obviously, please check out the current book that Judith is writing and the book that is about to be released. For Monica, I just want to quickly end on 3 points. Sort of what we all agreed on in the spirit of bridging divides. One is how tragic the moment is, in the sense that we have one of the most connected points in human history, it seems like we're all touching on, but also where the most divided in human history, or at least that's one of the claims that some of our panelists made. And so we have to solve the problem. That's the second point of agreement, is that one of the defining moments of the century is going to be able to utilize products and technological revolutions for human and societal good, that technological progress must mirror human progress. And I think the third thing that a lot of us agreed on is that we have agency in this process. Ultimately, we're the ones that are clicking the like button. It's not, Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey or anyone else. So you've got agency in this process. With that, I want to thank everyone for attending. I will leave it to Daniel to sort of end the room, but I appreciate all of your time. Thank you for coming.
This was a great conversation. Thank you all. And just took a quick look at all those questions. There were many, many fabulous questions. So
there were many.
It's a great audience. Thank you too.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Have a terrific evening, folks.
Have a great
Thank
night.
you.